So, congratulations on taking on the plastics crisis. I'm interested for people who would like to write a book, your process. Why did you decide to do Penguin and not do it yourself through BookBaby? Did you have an agent? How did you find that person? Tell us the process of how you did that book and what you wanted to achieve with it.
Yes, this is very out of the blue. Honestly, it was last summer. I had gotten an email from an editor from Penguin saying, "Hey, I read one of the articles you wrote in a magazine. I loved what you wrote, and we would love to have you write a book with us," which was mind blowing to me because it's never been, something on my mind. Ooh, like maybe I should write a book. It's never been, um, it's kind of been in the back of my mind. It was never something I really was like, yes, I want to write a book, as a teenager. And then we hopped in a phone call. We talked more details about it, and I learned about the book series that I'm a part of. It's called Pocket Change Collective. And the Pocket Change Collective is a collection of different books from different activists and artists, all talking about different issues. And it's really neat. It's mainly from young people talking about, the issue they're passionate about, but also their own personal stories and how they interconnect and sharing their personal experiences. They're smaller books. They're like Pocket Change is supposed to fit in your pocket and just be like a long essay style book. And once I heard about the whole series, and I was hooked. I knew I wanted to be a part of it. So since then, I've been working and writing with Penguin, and so now I have taken on the plastics crisis. It's available for pre-order, but it officially launches October 13th.
And how much interplay was there between you and the editor? My experience with books is they've gotten less and less hands-on in terms of their interaction with the author. What was your experience?
Yeah, there wasn't a ton. Because this was my first time, he definitely showed me, the ropes, what to do, how to kind of get organized and kind of pre-plan for it. And he would kind of just check everything and make sure I was kind of on the right path. And he gave me a few deadlines that kind of helped me keep on track with my work. And that was really helpful as well. And he really just checked, grammatical problems, or if there was something I mentioned, he'd be like, "Ooh, I would love if you could, elaborate a little bit more on that. I think that would be great." So he never really changed my story, and it was really all from the heart, all about my experiences and what I know. So it was really neat to be able, to work with an amazing editor like that and kind of let me do, what I'm passionate about. And if there's anything, he wanted to change was super minor or just wanted me to expand on different, stories I was telling.
You emailed that they weren't keen on having a resource list, which seemed to me really useful to a reader to have one page with these are the organizations where you can make a difference, these are the books that are really influential for me. So a one-page resource that you can take and plug your action in. What was their thinking on that?
I'm not exactly sure because I originally had a resource. I actually didn't have a resource list, but like in my book, I mentioned specific companies and brands, and then we decided to do a resource list afterwards. But then I just think we took it away just because I don't know exactly why, and I wish we still kind of had it. I don't have an exact answer on that. That's the only thing that's missing, I think.
Yeah. I wanted to say that I thought it read really well. It was informative. It was interesting. I like the idea of kind of combining your story and information. It keeps the reader really involved, but it's informative too.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely wanted, to not be like you're just reading, scientific research paper, like a book full of just information, because that can be really overwhelming, even though it's always great to have research. A whole book full can be a lot for most people, especially for young people. This is geared really for anybody, but it's mainly for young adults and teenagers. And I think, my story is really could be anybody's story. I'm just a normal teenager. I live in a normal community. I go to my public school that I'm districted to, and it really just started from a passion and a love for the environment. And I still consider myself, a normal teenager. And I think most kids, can share that experience or at least relate to it. So it's really neat to be able to share that and hopefully inspire other people that, hey, she's doing that and she's only 17. Maybe I can do that.
What is their plan for getting the word out? What are they going to give you? Book tour, radio show, interviews? How are they going to let people know about your book?
Yeah, it's kind of up in the air right now, especially with the pandemic, and we're not sure, how everything's going to look in October. The original plan was, doing like a book tour and publicizing, but obviously traveling may not be the best idea right now. So we're thinking about, pushing out as much on social media as possible, maybe doing some like online book tours, like Zoom calls and webinars. But it's still kind of all in the works. I don't know if you have any ideas on what we could do as well, but yeah, our whole plan's kind of shifted. We haven't focused a lot on it just because the Pocket Change Collective, they had 2 releases. So I'm part of the second release, like the second group of books being released. So the first release came out, I think, June 1st. So they kind of focused on that first before focusing on mine and the other book coming out in October.
Podcasts and radio talk shows, I think, are fun because you can do it at home and it gets the word out. So for me, I'd start collecting pertinent radio shows and podcasts and let them know about your book and invite them to have you as a guest.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a great idea.
I think it gets out to a lot of people, and also it'll stay online, so people don't have to hear the radio show or the podcast when it's happening. They can see the archive. Do you have another book in mind, a kind of a follow-up, or is this it for a while?
I think right now, just this book, just because I am now going to be a senior in high school, considering college, and so I'm kind of busy with that. But who knows? Maybe more books to come.
Mm-hmm. Where are you thinking of college? When I talked to you, I think it was University of Hawaii Hilo, maybe UC Berkeley. Where are you thinking now that would be your dream colleges?
Yeah, definitely right now I'm still considering Berkeley just because I want to look into studying political science and environmental science, and they have good programs for both. So that's what I'm really looking at. But I'm looking at several other schools. I probably have a list of like 9, 10 or so, but that's kind of my main school.
I graduated from there, and I got my teaching credential from there, and I absolutely loved it. It's not a school for an introvert because it's so big. Mm-hmm. It's huge, and your classes are huge. But they did have teaching assistants who had small discussion groups in conjunction with the big lecture classes. But I loved it because it was so international, and you met people from all over the world. And my last year there, I lived at International House, which was a great place to live. Oh. And I still have friends that I met at iHouse, and so it's been fun to keep in touch with them. To change the subject a little bit, what has been the pandemic's effect on climate movement? What to me it seems like a positive thing, is it shows if humans change their behavior, the pollution lessens, climate change lessens. What's your sense of the pandemic's effect?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, you see, the world kind of healing and breathing again with less people out on the roads. More industries are shut down, which is great. But as a waste perspective, especially with plastic pollution, it's a much bigger problem. It's gotten so much worse. And for a number of reasons. One is, our gloves and masks. I think the World Health Organization estimated we use around 90 million masks a month. And I think it was around 80 million gloves a month. And all of those are, single-use disposable plastics. And some of my friends that do like ocean, like they test waterways, and they've already found, gloves and masks out in the ocean just in the past, few months. And if you think of, our new normal is like takeout containers and, online packages, there's all those unnecessary like plastic packaging in it. And single-use plastics has kind of become the new normal for this pandemic, as it's seen, the better solution. And even the plastic industry is pushing out like, hey, single-use plastics, the safest material to use, which isn't proven true. And research even shows that Corona lasts longer on plastic than any other material. It'll last in there for several days compared to some other materials. It's just a few hours. And so it poses a huge threat with our waste production because oil prices have dropped. And plastic is made of oil, so it's actually cheaper to produce new plastic than recycled plastic. And recycling facilities, a lot of them aren't running right now either because of, health and safety concerns, touching our secondhand stuff. So the production of plastic has gone up. So there's a lot of things, I definitely didn't think about with the pandemic. But there's a lot of issues. And actually with air pollution, all the plastic that's used kind of like on the front lines of the virus, like, the testing kits or the masks and gloves or, the suits they have to wear, all of those are actually being incinerated. And that is obviously not very good, especially for the communities that are living in those areas, and mainly they're lower income communities. And there's so many long-term health impacts, and a lot of times they can't even afford, to maintain the symptoms that they have. So there's a lot of problems just with our waste that we aren't seeing. And I think it's important to highlight, especially because everyone does think, oh, the world is healing. We're doing so much better, and we are. But from a waste perspective, it has actually gotten so much worse.
When you just think of all the PPI that health professionals are wearing, and they want to be able to change it all the time. So just that waste alone is enormous.
Exactly. There's so much of it, and it's so hard to wrap your mind around, like even hand sanitizer bottles, and there's just so much plastic with this pandemic that we're using and then throwing away. And so the best solution is really just, trying reusable like gloves and masks to wear instead. Try and reduce the amount of plastic packaging that you get when you online shop. Try and get from sustainable companies that use, paper or other sustainable packaging. And it's kind of hard to avoid everything, especially with takeout. Takeout has definitely been harder because a lot of restaurants don't want to touch your like reusable containers if you bring them in. But, just trying to do the best that you can. Every little bit does help. But right now it's a lot harder to, live single-use plastic free.
What I read that I'm not clear about is that it's really hard to recycle plastics that have food on it that we've used that are contaminated in some way. Tell us about that. How does that work?
Of course. So recycling as a whole is kind of a broken system for plastics. For other materials like aluminum and paper, recycling is great. But plastics has never really been a great product to recycle. And as you mentioned with food, sometimes it's like labels or caps or stickers, it kind of makes them unrecyclable because a lot of times they don't want to waste workers' time to be cleaning stuff or, taking off these items. So it's just easier and more efficient for them to throw it away. And even just with plastic, they need a buyer for these materials. And there's 7 different types of plastics with different, chemical compounds and compositions. And so if there's not a buyer for some of those numbers, they throw it away. And a lot of those numbers usually don't get recycled. Mainly 1, 2, and sometimes 5 gets recycled. The rest are almost automatically thrown away. And so a lot of times, especially when I was younger, you hear in school, oh, recycling's so good. they're going to turn it into like a bike or a bench. And I always thought I was doing my part, oh, if I use this plastic, it's okay because I'm going to recycle it. And it's kind of been that out of sight, out of mind ideology. When you look into it, you're like, oh, this is still a part of the problem. And even with plastics, a lot of times when we recycle it, we don't recycle it here in America. A lot of westernized countries, we actually send it to other countries, especially in Asia, for them to deal with and recycle. And the conditions for there are absolutely terrible. There's this documentary on Amazon Prime called, I think it was Plastic China, and it was talking about how, we ship, not anymore, but we used to ship majority of our plastic to China, and the facilities of their recycling centers are terrifying. It's absolutely terrible. It's a human rights issues for those people. And one of my friends, she actually lives in East Java, Indonesia. Her village is absolutely destroyed by our plastic trash we send there to be recycled. She lives almost in a slum of our plastic trash that we're sending for them to deal with, and it's polluting the river that they live on. They rely on this water for drinking water, for bathing, for cleaning. And her and her family, they've been huge spokespeople for their village. They're in I don't know if you've seen the new documentary, The Story of Plastic. It's a new documentary, but it's absolutely wonderful, talking about how plastic is honestly a huge threat at every stage of its production, not just even at the pollution stage at the end of its life, but through every step of the way. But it's crazy to see how, we, as these westernized countries are like, oh, this isn't our problem anymore. We're going to send it over there for them to deal with, and we'll call it recycling. And I remember I actually was testifying for a local ordinance, and I was the last speaker to help pass a local ordinance on single-use plastics in our community. And someone else earlier speaking out against the bill and saying, most of the plastic in the ocean, it isn't coming from us. It's not our problem. It's mostly Asian countries. It's coming from their coastline. So we don't need to pass anything. That was like his concept of it. And thankfully, I was speaking after him, so I quickly rewrote and added stuff in my speech. I was like, actually, we send our trash to Asia, so it is our problem. And thankfully, that bill did pass. But yeah, it's just a lot of things we don't think about, and it's kind of covered up. But there's a huge waste problem when we're sending our stuff away. So recycling, we've always been taught it's the best solution. But really it isn't. We want to stop it from the source. Like recycling and cleanups, they are good, especially when they're effective. But only 2% of plastics is effectively recycled. The rest are either downcycled, and that's 10% of all plastics is downcycled. But the rest, are all ending up in our landfills or in our oceans.
What does downcycled mean?
So downcycled means when you take plastic and you try and recycle it into something new, it's a lesser quality of what it was originally. So with paper, you can recycle and recycle and recycle and constantly turn it into something new. Same with aluminum. But with plastics, most of the time, you can't really do that. So when you melt it and reform it into something new, it'll be more brittle and not as good of a quality as it originally was. So if you recycle it again, it probably would be even less quality if they even recycle it. They might even just throw that away just because it's such a poor quality. So plastics cannot be constantly recycled and reused. So it makes it, a terrible product to recycle.
I read somewhere about a kind of a bacteria that can decompose plastic. Have you heard of anything like that?
I haven't actually. I know there's a lot of research on trying to find solutions to decompose it. I've heard of I think there was a fungus or something that was decomposing it, but I honestly don't know enough about that research.
Yeah, that would be, we should follow up on that. I'm thinking in terms of the pandemic that, as you said, people are doing a lot of takeout so they don't sit in a restaurant, and styrofoam it looks like it has a little recycling symbol on the bottom, but what does that mean? That's confusing
Yeah.
to me.
So almost all plastics, they have that little recycling symbol and then a number in the middle. So styrofoam is a number 6. And it basically, each number just says, what kind of material they are, like under the branch of plastic. And actually, that recycling symbol makes you think, oh, this will be recycled, but actually doesn't necessarily mean it'll be recycled. It has the potential of being recycled. And styrofoam is one of the worst plastics for recycling, but also just for your own human health. Because plastic, especially styrofoam, is kind of porous. It's like a sponge. So like if you have a plastic container, let's say you put a curry in it and it has that like orangey tint left, that's because it soaks up some of the stuff that we put in it, but it also releases stuff into our food as well. So like especially like hot or cold food on styrofoam, it actually leaches toxins into the food that you're eating, which is very scary. And there's still a lot of research being done on the health impacts. But they're saying it could lead to cancer, or obesity, or diabetes. There's so many health implications that they're looking at, which is terrifying to think about. If we're putting our hot food, our hot takeout in these styrofoam containers, and there isn't a ton of legislation on styrofoam, but it's definitely one of the worst for our own health, but also to be recycled. And it's a huge pain in cleanups because it's like brittle and it crumbles so easily. I remember I went to my local lake and you just see the tiny little styrofoam balls all on the shoreline because, people were just, I guess, dumping it out from the lake on their boats. And it's a huge hassle to clean up.
What are alternatives for containers and, well, straws, we know, metal, paper, plastic bags use cloth, face masks, cotton or whatever. What are alternatives that you would like to see more widely used?
Yeah, so definitely, I usually like to bring my own containers to reduce any waste at all. But if there's some restaurants have, paper takeout containers, or some even have bamboo. There's a few different alternatives, but not many restaurants have those. So the best thing to do is bring your own containers, but if you can't do that, especially during the pandemic, it's harder. I would reach out to the manager or the company and ask them to consider having a sustainable alternative in place instead. So it's not just even for you, but for everybody. And also if you talk about the health implications, I think they'll be more eager to make that change because, if you think of the environment, for us, that's really touching to us, but that's not, everybody's main focus. But if you talk about like health issues, that's when they're like, oh, that could be a serious problem because that's more personal to everybody. So if you reach out, same way with straws, like if you see people with plastic straws at like giving out at restaurants, talk to the manager and ask about, not automatically giving them out or using paper straws instead. Simple things like that. It's not only just, that one straw, but they use so many every day just alone. And you can only imagine, if they make that shift, how much they'll save.
To change the subject a little bit, there's a big push because of the presidential election in November to get the Democrats to commit to the Green New Deal and a tough climate policy. And it looks like the Democratic Central Committee is kind of resisting committing to the kind of policy that the Green New Deal would like. What are you hearing about the politics of climate change?
That's a good question. And honestly, I don't know a whole lot, especially since the lockdown of the pandemic. I know a lot has kind of slowed down, and a lot more focus has been on the pandemic, as well as Black Lives Matter movement, and kind of passing legislation for those two bills. And I know everything else has kind of been put on the back burner. So I don't know a whole lot on the Green New Deal and climate-wise. But I do know a bit there's a new bill, the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act that was introduced, I think it was early February of this year, and I actually got to go to DC and help introduce it. But it's the first national bill regarding plastic pollution here in the U.S., and it put more pressure on the producers of plastic than on the consumers. Oh, like take your own reusables, or like it's your problem. But instead putting pressure on them to either make changes or take back the plastic that they produce for their consumers. And so that would be a huge win for us if we get to pass that. But like I said, everything's kind of slowed down with the lockdowns and the Black Lives Matter movement. But I will definitely keep you updated.
Were you able to testify? You were able to go to DC in February?
I got to help introduce the bill. So we had like a press release kind of event, like a press event, and I actually got to go to the Capitol, and there were 6 members of Congress that spoke, and then a few different activists spoke as well. So I got to speak, which is really very crazy for me. I never would have imagined. Like I'm not even a voting age yet, but it was truly like such an incredible moment, especially for young people. I kind of spoke on my speech on behalf of all young people, saying that, this is incredible to be able to pass that, especially for our generation and for generations to come. So that was really, amazing for me to be able to have that experience. But everything's been kind of put in the back burner, but we still need a lot of support on that bill, especially it's great to reach out to your members of Congress or, different candidates that are running for Congress, or if your member of Congress is running for re-election, definitely reach out now. I think now is one of the best times to do that because they want to get, everybody's votes. So they want to listen to what their constituents have to say. Because I reached out to my member of Congress, but he's retiring, and he was like, no, this isn't a huge issue for me. And I was like, okay, that's fine, but you're leaving. So I'm focusing more on, the people that'll take his place, because that they want to listen more now to get our votes. So that's something you can do today is reach out. See if your member of Congress is supporting the bill already and signed on. If not, send them a message. And the best thing to do is make it personal to them. Like for me, I talked about, our lake and our rivers that everyone in our community loves. Everyone loves going out and spending time there because we don't have a beach. If you have a beach, that's probably the best thing to talk about. We were just talking about how everyone loves the lake, and, you want to keep it clean and pristine, for your kids and your grandkids and for my generation. So as you can make it as personal as possible, it'll definitely, pull at their heartstrings and hopefully get them the support, because we need bipartisanship on this bill before we can get it passed.
In your book, you start out by talking about kind of advocacy you did in the Georgia state capitol, and that you thought that since the previous speaker they weren't paying any attention to, it was really a surprise to you when you started speaking. They're like, oh, and they're actually listening and paying attention. Do you think that's a strategy that youth can use in making change?
Most definitely. I think a lot of times young people think, oh, like I'll wait until I'm older, and kind of have that mindset like, as a young person, I can't do much, or they won't listen to me. And I will say I was definitely one of those people for sure. And that moment was definitely, life-changing for me, just because I just remember standing there and seeing this. She was a great speaker, but nobody was paying any attention to her. And I was like, oh my gosh, they're not going to listen to me. There's no way. I've been preparing so much. This means so much to me, but they're not listening to her. Like, they're not going to give any attention to me. But to have, the whole room's attention, really showed me that young people have a voice. And, it's now young people are finding their voice as well. Like you see Greta, you see so many other youth activists like Jamie Margolin, Genesis Butler, so many other young people speaking up on issues they're passionate about, and they're being heard, especially by adults and change makers. And it's really impactful because when I was younger, I didn't really have a whole lot of role models to look up to that were young people. I had Malala that I looked up to, but that was really the only young person I could really look up to. But as a young person, I think it's kind of funny to see how shocked people can be. I think a lot of times they're like, oh, it's this girl, she's probably from the Girl Scouts, or this is a school project. I already have a predetermined idea of, how it's going to go. And honestly, it's funny to watch their reaction. They're like, oh, wow, she really knows what she's talking about. Like, she's really passionate about this. And so I think as a young person, it's a huge tool to be able to to speak up, because not only is it different for adults to listen from kids, because they're so used to hearing from other adults, but also for young people to see somebody just like them speaking up as well, because usually they're used to hearing adults telling them what they can do, and that's how they have that mindset, oh, I can only do that when I'm older. But when they have these role models and young people to look up to, that's when they can be like, oh, I can do that. That's, they're just like me.
You know what I thought was, I really got a kick out of this, the TikTok and K-pop activists who had an influence on the planning for Trump's inaugural rally for his campaign in Tulsa last week. I don't know. I think they had a big impact. What do you think?
For sure. And I remember me and my friends, we have like a group chat, and every time he does events like this, we text each other. We're like, here's the link, sign up, save some seats. And it's crazy to finally, see how big of an impact that has had on these rallies, because there's been young people doing this for several rallies, but I think this has definitely been the biggest impact we've had. And I think, honestly, it was because I think Donald Trump was so set and vocal and like, oh, we're going to have 1 million people there. Because like having, I think it was around 6,000 people there, is actually still quite a lot of people, especially during the pandemic. But I think what made it so great was the fact that they were so excited to have so many people there and announced it so much. And for them to be completely wrong and to have all these young people, be the masterminds behind it is incredible.
Are you on TikTok? Are you a K-pop fan? How did you know about this kind of tactic?
Yeah, I do go on TikTok. I don't really have a TikTok account, but I do watch videos on TikTok. It's actually, what's crazy, it's actually become one of my main sources of like political news from a lot of young people, which is funny. There's a lot of young people, talking about political issues, and then obviously I do my own research as well to verify whatever they're saying. But it's actually been a great tool to get the word out on a lot of different issues. So it's been really interesting. But that's where I found out about it, and some of my friends as well. But yeah, there's a lot of things that happen on TikTok for sure.
Well, you can only have a minute that you upload, right? So people have to have a really powerful minute.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, they vary a lot. Sometimes it's a video. A lot of viral videos happen on TikTok, whether it's filming protests and like what's actually happening and not what the media shows, or showing. I think recently a video came out that I saw of those very like Karen kind of moms, just how do I describe it? What was she doing? I think she was calling this guy the N-word and was just being like absolutely terrible and racist to him, and he pulled his phone out and was recording her, and she backed off and she was like, you're attacking me, and that video went viral. And so it's really great to see kind of like the easiest way to make videos viral is like any kind of video to get the word out. TikTok's a great resource for that, to kind of show these videos, but also you can do educational videos. It could just be a video of me talking about how other people can support causes. Like some people talk about, GoFundMe's for like Breonna Taylor and how you can support, or they have links on, Black-owned businesses that you can support as well. So there's a lot of resources, a lot of information. And it's all video based, all videos that are posted. But it's been a game changer for sure for young people.
How interesting. Well, what if there's some juicy 5-minute video of some kind of confrontation or something? Is there a way that you can see more than 1 minute?
You can post, if you wanted to do, like, split it up into 5 videos and do, like, part 1, part 2, because people do that, like, have, like, part 1, part 2 is coming up next, then kind of splice it up. Or you can just kind of edit the best parts into 1 minute if you can. But yeah, that's what most people do.
you've raised thousands and thousands of dollars for good environmental causes, and a lot of people would like to know, I'm sure, how you do that. What works in terms of fundraising for good causes?
Yeah, there's a lot of different tactics. For young people, I think what's definitely powerful is social media, just because we're so tech savvy. And especially with the pandemic going on, it's hard to do like physical like fundraisers, like an event. So social media is definitely a great tool, like GoFundMe's, things like that, or doing petitions like Change.org petitions. But fundraising wise, social media has definitely been a huge game changer. It's also just getting people to show up. But when I do fundraisers, like event wise, um, my favorite fundraiser I did was like a one night event. It was like a movie night. And I just had a ton of my classmates help me, so we can kind of plan it up for the next few months. And we really just try to spread the word as much as possible, whether it was, making posters and putting it out for people locally to see, or we definitely posted on social media. We reached out to our local newspaper articles, and there's a lot of online websites that you can write, like events for people to go to. So that was really helpful for sure. Just spread the word out as much as possible. And we didn't have like a register, like a place to register or anything. It was just like, come and show your support. So we had no idea how many people would show up. And that was honestly quite nerve wracking.
Yeah.
The day before. We're like, oh my gosh, what if like nobody shows up? But we had over 300 people show up, which is crazy for our small little community.
That was for movie night, and what were the movies?
So it was just one movie. It was actually, so this was a few years ago, and I used to love American Girl dolls, and it was for a horse farm. And I knew that young girls, they love horses and they love American Girl dolls. And their doll of the year, they made a movie about her, and she had a horse, and it was kind of about her and her horse. And so I thought that'd be perfect to show and get people to go there, and just watch the movie. And so we raised, that night, I think it was over $2,500 just in those like few hours. And we also actually, the newspaper article we wrote, someone from CBS saw it and wanted to do a story on it. And I talked about how the horse farm on a good month, it costed like $10,000 for like necessities like food, water, like without any, major surgeries or anything. That'd be like $10,000. And so someone saw that and anonymously wrote a check for $10,000 for the farm. So that was really incredible too. But yeah, so it was just, that was a few of the things that I did. I haven't done any major fundraisers since, but from my experience, I think having personal events is definitely more impactful, especially for the horse farm, because people got to be at the sanctuary and see the horses for themselves, and kind of see what they've gone through, instead of just doing it like at my house where it wouldn't be as impactful.
What about your campaign to get Starbucks to rethink their supposedly disposable coffee cups and stuff? How that wasn't local, which we have been talking about. It's international, I guess. How did you work to influence them?
So there's a coalition of around, I want to say 15 organizations, and we all got together, and because there was research showing that they're paper cups, are like paper cups you always see at Starbucks. You think that when you recycle it, it's going to be recycled because it's paper. But actually, because it's lined with plastic on the inside to help, seal it with our hot drinks, it actually makes it impossible to recycle, which is crazy, because it's just the mixed material that they have. And I had some students put trackers on those paper cups because Starbucks claimed that they were recyclable, and they had recycling stations in their stores. And so they put the trackers on the cups and put them in the recycling, and every single one ended up in the landfill. So we got petitions running, and with all of our organizations together and trying to blast out as much as we could. We got over 1 million petitions signed. to try and convince Starbucks to create a more sustainable paper coffee cup. And we got their attention. Eventually, we actually had an event in Seattle. I couldn't make it because it was during my exams, but they had like a protest out in front of the Starbucks headquarters, and we had a paper cup like monster outside their office as well. And we had the 1 million petitions, and they agreed to. They actually decided to invest $10 million into finding a more sustainable paper coffee cup. We haven't heard any news about what that new coffee cup looks like or where that's gone since then. But we're still trying to put more pressure on them, to do something as soon as possible. But yeah, and since then, they've announced, that they aren't going to use the straws, and they have those lids, and they're going to be more eco-friendly, which is awesome.
That's really wonderful. Yeah, you've made a huge difference. Is there anything else that you'd like people to know about your book or work that you're doing now?
Yeah, if you want to know where to order my book, if you go to handforchange.org, I have a section right, if you scroll down just a little bit, it's right there. It'll give you the link to where you can pre-order. And Hannah for Change is my website, and all of my social media handles is just Hannah for Change with the number 4 in the middle.
Oh, I wanted to ask you one thing that I didn't understand from your book. You said a lot of our clothes contain plastic. Well, tell me about that, because I try to buy cotton or wool or natural fabrics.
Yeah, definitely. That was something that shocked me, but some of our clothing actually contains plastic. It's called polyethylene. So if you look in on your tags, it's kind of what makes stretchy clothing, so like yoga pants or some t-shirts. It's this really stretchy kind of fabric because it's made of the plastic materials and those threads, and like all materials and clothing, it sheds naturally. Like if you put it in the wash, you're just wearing it out. But especially in the washing machine, it's pretty harmful because these fibers are so small. When they wash out, it doesn't get filtered because they're so small, and they end up just going straight into our rivers and our oceans when you put them in the washing machine. So that becomes a huge problem. And unfortunately, there's a lot of, not a lot, but there's some brands that are, making sure it's like, oh, this is from recycled bottles, or this is from trash we cleaned up, which is always great. It's supporting that cause, but also that's creating its own problem itself, putting the plastic back into our oceans. So that's something I definitely didn't know. But just doing something as simple as, checking your tags before you buy something. That's what me and my mom do. We're like, ooh, we like this shirt. And we're like, oh, never mind. We'll find a different one. And not every shirt has it, which is great. Most shirts don't. But it's always good to check to see, if there's these synthetic fibers in your clothing before you purchase it.
I've also read that cotton production is really polluting.
So, it is.
I think, 100% cotton, that's great, but it's not, right?
Yeah, it's a struggle, and I actually reached out to my friend. She focuses on sustainable fashion, and I was like, what exactly dictates a sustainable fashion? And she goes, it's very complicated because it's really just a lesser of two evils, because, if you think of the plastic side, that's obviously a huge problem. But like if you look at cotton, you're like, oh, it's such a huge, it uses so much water, and there's so much, there's a big carbon footprint with that. And so there's always it's very hard with fashion. And so the easiest solution, usually to be sustainable in fashion is really, to stop buying from fast fashion, and trying thrifting, buying secondhand as much as possible. But if you're looking more at the material side of it, like plastic, just try and avoid those materials in your clothing.
And some people are taking used clothing and designing it into new kind of fashion. Is there a name for that?
I think just
repurposing?
Yeah, repurpose, like refashion, repurposing it. Yeah, there's a lot of people, especially on Pinterest, that are kind of like cutting up clothing and resewing it into different things, which is very sustainable instead of, it ending up being thrown away, as repurposing it into, a new article of clothing or something else for like your house or for cleaning or something like that.
I really like, I get all my clothes from secondhand stores because there's more variety. Like they'll have, if you go to a department store, it's this year's fall
Yeah,
colors are 1, 2, and 3, and they're all the same. And
exactly.
if you
And
go
it's
to,
like,
you never
oh,
know what wonderful thing you're going to find in a thrift store.
yeah, it's like a treasure hunt every time. But yeah, especially major clothing, it can be really wasteful because once something's out of fashion, a lot of times they just throw it away. Like it'd be more sustainable even to just give it to homeless people or donating it somewhere where it could be put into use. But a lot of them have research has shown that they just throw it away or they burn it because they don't want anyone else having their clothing.
So much work, Hannah.
Yeah.
Let me, last question. Tell me again how you stay motivated in the face of such huge obstacles.
Yeah, it can be challenging sometimes for sure, especially like, my algorithm on social media is like all this work. So it can be really overwhelming because everyone I follow, all the stuff I look at is like environmental or it can be really depressing and overwhelming. But I think just doing the work that I do, even though I don't always see the impact I make, but whenever there's someone that tells me, like, oh, because of you, like, I've made this switch, or um, anyone telling me they feel inspired, that always motivates me to keep going. And even just my family and friends, helping uplift me sometimes when I'm down. Because a lot of times I don't get to see, the impact I make, on people. And that can be kind of hard sometimes. I'm like, oh, like, I don't know. Like, if I'm talking to a group of students, my goal is, hopefully to inspire at least one person out of that whole group of students. And you never know what they'll do with it and who they'll inspire along the way. So that's what really motivates me to keep going because there's always so much to be doing, it never ends, unfortunately. But every little bit counts. Every little bit counts. So don't let that discourage you because it can be overwhelming for sure if you look at these big issues like climate change and plastic pollution. They're huge issues. And as one person, you'd be like, oh my gosh, like this is so overwhelming. This is too much. But every little bit does make an impact. And as one person, you can have such a huge impact on other people, on businesses, on legislation. And there's a huge power in numbers as well. Like if everyone thought, they could make an impact, then nothing would ever change. But even if you see with the Black Lives Matter movement, all these people are coming together. They're all individual people, but the fact that we're all coming together for these protests, to sign these petitions and put pressure on the police department, that's when we're starting to actually see real change. It just takes that one email or that one more signature on that petition or supporting, Black-owned businesses. They all make such a huge impact. So don't try and feel discouraged.
Okay. To me, what seems like really important that you young people 18 and over can do is vote, but they have a history of being the least likely to vote. And I know Georgia recently had a big fiasco in their voting, made it so hard for people. I guess because of Governor Kemp. That's kind of his plan. What is your strategy for getting people to vote who are young and progressive?
Yeah, it's interesting for sure. But I think especially more Gen Z youth are interested in politics and more interested in voting. I think there's 4 million young people that are turning 18 before the election that are going to be registered to vote. That's a huge number of young people. And they can have a huge sway, especially locally, on our representatives. It's just a matter of trying to get as many to show up and register as possible.
But why do you think they don't? It's like I'm too cynical, I don't have time. What do you hear people say as to why they didn't vote?
I think sometimes my vote doesn't matter, and I understand that. Like if you look at the bigger scale, like because of the electoral college, but locally, that does make a huge impact on your local representatives. Some people really just don't care. They're like, I don't really keep up with politics, or it doesn't really impact me, but it does. You just aren't really paying attention to it. And I don't know. It's hard to try and get people to care, but a lot of times, politics can really make a huge impact on anything you care about. So just trying to convince people, your one vote can really make a difference, especially locally, on who represents you.
Right. Okay. Thank you.